Lessons Not Yet Learnt is a podcast that uncovers the costly mistakes that businesses keep making and how to finally move past them. Through storytelling, candid conversations, and expert perspectives, I'm on a mission to challenge outdated thinking, bring those overlooked lessons to the surface, and drive meaningful change, one story at a time. Hi, welcome back to Lessons Not Yet Learnt. I'm your host, Kiran Kachela, and today I'm going to take you back a couple of decades and then back to the future. If we look at where we are today, we are surrounded by AI. AI is integrated into so much of what we do, whether that's drafting an email to a colleague or simply getting a recommendation on what to watch on the couch tonight with Netflix. And we know that AI is transforming the way in which we live, and it will continue to do so. So the future will look very different because AI is growing exponentially at breakneck speed. And so whilst AI is giving us a real insight into what the future might look like, and there are still lots of unknowns, it's also holding up a mirror to the past 2 decades since the Dotcom bubble, where we saw technology transform the way in which we live. But we also saw many failures along the way. Data failures, cultural inertia, tech-first thinking. We saw all of those things, and we're seeing some of those things come into play as we are now in the AI bubble. And so that's why I want to go back, and I want to understand what actually happened back then. So if you're anywhere around my age or a bit older, you'll remember the 1990s. And I remember how excited I was sat in front of my PC and listening to that sound of that modem, that screeching sound, that static symphony that gave me some indication that I was finally getting online. And the excitement of logging onto AOL and the excitement of spending an hour downloading a song that I wanted to listen to off Napster. Those were the days, and there was this huge amount of excitement. We were at the edge of our seats because we knew that this was going to transform our futures and transform the way we lived. And it did. Looking back now, looking at the last couple of decades, it has completely transformed the way in which we all live, the way we operate, the way we do business. And we know that AI is going to do exactly the same thing, but even quicker. And it's going to be absolutely transformative at another scale. Now, I wasn't lucky enough to be in the boardroom back then in the 1990s. I was a bit too young for that. But I do remember watching the news, hearing stories, and I've heard stories ever since about what really did happen back then. And I've seen and heard all of those stories about companies throwing money at anything with a .com title, building these fancy digital shop fronts, but then still working on paper ledgers in the background, creating these great websites, but actually forgetting how to make it profitable, and thinking that the World Wide Web is this fancy magic trick that is going to solve all of their problems without them needing to change a single process. And these were the failures we saw back then. Now, sitting here today in the AI bubble, I can't help but get this sense of deja vu that actually some of those lessons have not yet been learned in the last 2 decades since the dot-com bubble. And so I'm really keen today to understand exactly what did go on then. What lessons have we learned and what lessons have we not yet learned? And so as I wasn't lucky enough to be in the boardroom back then, I have a guest that was. Today's guest is Robbins, and he has spent 3 decades working in technology as a senior leader, working across tech giants such as Capgemini, Fujitsu, and Microsoft. And he was sat in those boardrooms paying very close attention to what was going on. So I'm really keen to understand what happened back then, get a real good understanding of what we haven't yet learned and what we can do to start making those changes so that we're not stuck in the 1990s. So let's dig in. Hi Marcus, thanks for coming today.
You're welcome. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too. I will warn our listeners, you and I can yap forever. We've got so much to talk about. Marcus, I wasn't around in the boardrooms in the 1990s. I watched what was going on. I heard all about the dot-com bubble, but I wasn't in the boardroom, and you were. As we're sitting today and sort of we're in this AI bubble, what goes through your head in terms of sort of the journey over the last couple of decades?
Joe, it's really interesting because we can now see some incredible parallels between what took place back in the 90s and the early 2000s, through the 2010s, through the digital era, where, if you like, there were two bubbles. There's the stock market frenzy around technology companies and who's going to compete and who's going to win. And people tend to get a little bit caught up on that. But when it comes to the organizations using the technologies or using whichever management method is the trend of the day at the time, that bubble doesn't really matter. That bubble is kind of irrelevant because certain organizations will prevail, certain ones will disappear. Most organizations are placing their bets with the gorillas or the supersized companies anyway. So for them, it doesn't matter. So I think it's an unnecessary distraction. But what was interesting, if we go back to the dot-com era, if we go back to the mobile era, if we see the transition from mobile into digital transformation, one very similar thing happened that's happening at the moment. And the first thing is people just lost their minds. Talking a frenzy about the art of the possible. And then the other side of that was the backlash, which is the fear-mongering, the scaremongering and everything else. So around all of the goodness, there's a lot of nonsense noise going on. But if we take it down into the organizations and look at the way in which organizations approached the dot-com era, most of them looked at it as a technology program. We go on to mobility, right? We need to use mobile. We go on to digital. We need to digitalize, or we need to digitally transform, though most didn't transform. But it all centered around the technology conversation. The question they were asking themselves is, how can we take advantage of this technology? How can we use this technology within our organization? And the question should have been, what does our organization need, and where does this technology play a part in addressing what our organization needs? Absolutely.
And you know, this is something that I can definitely say I've seen a lot of in the 2 decades that I've been working. You know, it's so the conversations are very technology led. It's all about what technology solution they want to buy next, and you know, what the features of the technology solutions are, and all about the questions around investments, but no one's actually sort of going back to the really fundamental question of what do we actually want to do? Where do we want to go?
And I think, you know, Simon Sinek made a comment that most organizations struggle because they forget why they were born. And I think in that, he's alluding to the fact that organizations get distracted by the internals. They end up doing a lot of busy work. And also, as organizations scale, you tend to get fiefdoms, you get silos, you get personal politics, etc., all of which helps the organization drift away from what the organization is there to do. So I think for many organizations, the first question that's most important in any organization is what's important.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually one of the first questions I ask whenever we've sort of facilitated a strategy session. The first question I ask is, why do we exist?
Yeah.
Why do we exist? And it's really interesting because you'd expect everybody to be able to just jump to the answer, but actually you get a real mishmash of answers, which just immediately tells you that actually they're not clear on that. They've lost sight. They've lost their way.
And I think that's so true. And it's very easy to do because people get very busy. They get very close to what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. And it's very, very hard to step back from that and take enough time to actually look at what we really should be doing. because people aren't given that time. It's, again, because you foreground activity over outcomes, people tend to get focused on the activity, and as long as I'm being active. So to your point, people losing sight of why they're there. The first question is, why do we exist? What value do we provide? But then you start to cascade that down, and you'd sort of say, so if that is what the organization is there to do, what's its drive, its ambition, its intent, then what is your part in all of that?
Exactly.
And there's a whole cultural spin-off we could take around that conversation. Absolutely. But the reality is most parts of organizations optimize for their part, and in optimizing for their part, they sometimes forget how that contributes to the big picture. Michael Hammer and James Champney talked about that in 1993 in Re-Engineering the Corporation, is that you're optimizing in silos, you're not considering the big picture, you're not considering the end-to-end. So then we bring it back to the technology, what people are doing in the Dotcom. It's how can I put internet technologies on this bit of my business? How can I put mobile technologies on this bit of my business? How can I digitalize this bit of my business? Is you're forgetting how can we use technology as one tool of many tools to drive who we serve, what value we provide to them, how it's differentiated, what we need to be really good at in order to be able to do that, how we create and deliver value to our chosen customers.
So tell me, what was it really like back then? So, you were in those companies, you saw what was going on. What was it like? What did you see?
It was carnage, to be honest. It was the frenzy of excitement about what was possible. And again, as I say, people keep losing their minds. It's like, what can we do with this? What can we do with that? Et cetera, et cetera. Again, nobody ever has space to breathe. There was the report that Microsoft put out a few months ago in their survey for frontier firms, where they talked about 78% of managers citing themselves being overwhelmed at work with too much to do. Well, that's the reality, but that's not a new reality. That reality has been around for 2 or 3 decades, which means that they are unable to step back and take the space to look at what they need to do. So the frenzy was there. People were engaging with the technology organizations. It was really the first time when the business started engaging with external technology organizations, circumventing the IT organization, and buying solutions that were very, very focused on a specific need. Solution selling is one of those things which is very, very strong in the IT industry, possibly the worst thing to ever hit the IT industry, because it's all about a hammer looking for a nail. And so people would go and find something that does something for their department. It could be the HR function, it could be the finance function, it could be production. And they're, again, coming back to optimizing in silos. And there's some great examples that we can go on to talk about of how that's happening now in the intelligence era through AI. But it really is an inward focus, an insular focus, and almost a competitive mindset within the organization. And I think one of the things that people tend to forget is that incentives play a massive part in this.
Absolutely. You manage what you measure, and measures drive behaviors.
Yeah.
And that really comes from the top, doesn't it? It
does come from the top, but it's also baked into the systems, because you've got systems that reinforce that. You've got best practice in terms of compensation. It's like, well, I don't need best practice, I need perfect practice for my organization. There was a book written a number of years ago. It said, "On the folly of rewarding A whilst expecting B." And it sums it up beautifully, is if you reward A, you're going to get A. Even if you expect B, you're still going to get A. You tell people to do it, B, you're going to get A. And it just perpetuates. So this is why we've talked about this before. We talk about an organization being a complex adaptive system.
Yeah.
And all of those parts are interlinked. And if your compensation doesn't line up with the work you're doing, it doesn't line up with how you're structured, it doesn't line up with what's happening in the external market, all of the economic factors around you, then it all falls down. It's a house of cards model.
Yes.
And so it's really, really important to consider the alignment of everything you do.
The system as a whole.
The system as a whole
Yeah.
is what delivers value. And at the end of the day, the system is only there to create value in the environment that exists at the time and the environments that exist in the future. You can't build a system which works for a hypothetical environment in which you exist, because you don't exist. You exist in the environment that you're in at the moment. So your job as a leader is to play your part in creating that system that delivers the outcomes you're looking for in that environment. And then you've got subsystems within that should be doing the same thing, contributing to the whole.
Yeah, absolutely. So were there any stories of like an absolute disaster car crash? Because I just think there's so much that can be learned. Like some of the things you've just described about what happened back then, this competitive feeling of like just needing to do something and for the sake of doing something. And I guess there's a lot that we can take away from those examples, because we're seeing some of those things repeated today.
We are, and I think a couple of examples I saw, without naming names to punish many of the innocent. If we go back to the Dotcom, it was taking our business online. That was the mantra. The first mantra was build an intranet internally and job done. Then they realized it wasn't quite enough. So let's take everything online. An online business is very different from what they used to call a bricks and mortar business. All of these systems, business systems and technology systems that you need in place to support an online business are very different from those needed to support a traditional business where you retail through your outlets, or you provide your goods to organizations that retail through their outlets. Again, the overall system is very, very different to do that. So people would change the technology, but they wouldn't change the system.
Yes.
So they would put a shop front up. People could go on and buy things. They couldn't fulfill them.
Yeah.
In some cases, organizations couldn't even collect the money for them.
So they were still using paper ledgers and, nothing had changed in the background. They just had a different shop front.
Yeah. And then you had the people side of things, is people were not familiar with this new online world. It was something that we're going to see parallels again now, is building capability, building understanding of what is needed in order to succeed in a very, very different business model.
And trust, I guess, as well.
Trust is just as important, both externally and internally.
Yeah.
And I remember myself going back to 1996, I think it was, when somebody suggested that I could buy a book off this American company named after a South American river. And put my credit card details in, and I could buy it, but I'm not putting my credit card details in there.
Yeah.
Are you crazy? I've been told my entire life, keep your credit card details private, and now you want me to put them into this website? So there was that consumer trust issue, which the convenience of it got over relatively quickly. But then there's the internal trust issue about the change that we're trying to make. And I think the biggest lesson would have been, the two big changes for the Dotcom would have been the business model was different. You can't just slap the internet on front of your business.
Yeah.
You need a new business model.
Yeah.
And you need a different culture. So if you look at business model and culture, those were the big failings from that era. And technologists get a bad rap from those areas. Technologists were doing what technologists doing, is creating some amazing things with technology.
Yeah.
The issue doesn't lie with them. The issue lies with the decisions that were made, and also the failing to change decision rights in a new model in order to make the great technology these guys created successful.
Yeah, exactly. And we see that play true today, don't we? It's not the technology that's at fault. It's not the people necessarily creating some of the or selling some of these fancy solutions.
Yeah.
It's actually the decisions that we're making that surround it. The fact that we're probably still playing with the 1990s playbook, still rolling out technology as if we're sat in the 1990s, still making some of those same mistakes. All of the things you've just described, we're seeing those today.
We are. And I think if you were talking to a technology audience, they'd be saying, well, hang on a minute. We've got DevOps, we've got continuous integration, we've got test-driven development, we've got automated testing, we're using cloud, we're using all of the great techniques. We are not using the same models, but it's the model that sits around them which is the issue. No, the techniques and the tools they're using are very modern and very up-to-date. In most organizations, there's one or two spectacular exceptions that I've still been working with who are literally following the 1990s playbook right down to the detail. A lot of organizations have moved on and are increasing to move on in both private and public sector. They're doing a great job. It's what sits around them that still is the issue. It's the decisions which are made. And the other part is when people tend to describe organizations, they talk about the business and technology as if they're kind of two sides. It's like, technology is a business function in the same way that marketing, sales, production, logistics, finance, marketing, HR are business functions. And organizations need to start treating technology as a business function and understanding that the job of technology is to support the business strategy.
Yes.
And support the operations that implement the business strategy. And therefore they can't be separated.
No.
You've got to stop treating it as, oh, it's an IT shop. It isn't an IT shop.
Yeah.
It's an essential business function. It's becoming increasingly essential on a daily basis, and it needs to be integrated. You have one strategy for the organization, and all of the ways of working, the structures, everything else, the entire operating model supports that one strategy.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's just like, you see finance integrated in, sort of into all the functions. They have to think about the financial implications. It's the same. Technology is synonymous with, it's absolutely integrated with business, and that's why I don't like the term digital transformation, because it isn't digital transformation, it's just transformation. And technology is a part of it, as is all the other aspects that make up that transformation. But you just mentioned that you've seen, I guess companies are doing things differently to what they may have been doing in the 1990s. What have you seen change in terms of how they're rolling out technology?
I think the main changes have been from using agile methods.
Okay.
Recognizing that the waterfall method isn't the best method all the time. Sometimes it's absolutely the best method, but sometimes it isn't. And unfortunately, it becomes kind of like a religious war. It's like, we're waterfall, we're agile.
Yes.
No, it's and thinking is what you need. So you need to say, what is the right treatment strategy to apply technology to a specific problem? And in this case, it's waterfall. In this case, it's agile. If you're looking at large-scale technology programs, there's probably a bit of both in there if you're doing it sensibly. But that doesn't mean you should have some Frankenstein's monster of something which is a semi-waterfall, semi-agile method. Make sure the separation is there.
I'm with you. It's all about being adaptive and relevant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the second thing is that the technology has come on so much in terms of the ability of technology to help you deliver technology. I mean, we have to remember that technology is still a relatively immature industry as such. I mean, it's had its birthplaces, people saying, everyone will have a different view on when its birthplace was, but you had bureau services starting in the 1950s, moving into the 60s, and then 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, it really exploded. But it's still a relatively immature industry. It's still a growing industry. And practices take a long time to be established. And in such a dynamic, fast-moving industry, those things need to be updated more and more quickly. So the pace of change is frenetic. So I have seen great advancements in the way that technology is delivered. And again, they've advanced so much, they're really not the problem.
Okay.
The problem becomes decision-making.
Yeah.
The problem becomes incentives. The problem becomes governance. I spent some time a little while ago talking to a body in the financial services area. And they were talking about how they were struggling with delivery. The business was complaining that technology wasn't delivering what they wanted, when they wanted it, how they wanted it, et cetera, et cetera. So the decision was taken that they would move to agile methods. But it was the IT function that took that decision, and the business was saying, that's absolutely fine, you can do all of your funky agile methods, but we want specifications to sign off. We want some governance controls in place. And it had got to the point, and this is one thing that tends to get missed in the headlines. I was sitting working through this with the people from the IT function. We got to the point that almost 50% of the room were in tears, genuine tears.
Wow.
From the stress and anxiety that had been placed upon them by trying to implement one model inside a larger system that hadn't flexed to accommodate the way in which they were doing things.
The foundations that needed to be there to enable it to work.
Yeah, and most of it again came down to, and we see this so much, it came down to the decision authority, decision making within the organization. People wanted to retain control.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I think we're going to see a shift in as we look forward into the intelligence era, is people are going to need to start to shift to a paradigm of coordination rather than control. Because control is slow, it tends to be slow. It doesn't always be, but traditional models of control tend to be slow, whereas coordination is fast. Coordination is harder. Don't get me wrong, coordination is harder because coordination requires a different mindset. It requires a contribution mindset, and you don't get that with most command and control structures in place. So that's going to cascade on to a different set of skills required from leaders and decision makers in organizations, because they're not going to need to this mindset of being the smartest person in the room.
No.
All the decisions are coming from me. What they need to do is create an environment in which those decisions can be made.
Yeah.
And then empower people with the right expertise to make those decisions. However, you need some constructs in place in order for that coordination to be effective.
Yeah.
In order to, going back to the point we were making earlier, for people to be aligned in the organization to what the organization is there to do.
Yeah.
The only way you can realistically do that is with a good set of principles, and I know that's something that
exactly
you're
what I had in my mind.
about.
Yeah, exactly. As you were saying that was exactly what was going through my mind. It's those really key guiding principles and values. It comes back to exactly what we said earlier. You know, why do we exist? What's really important? What is value? How do we define value? And if you've got those underlying principles clear, then actually you've got a really solid foundation for building everything on top of. But
yeah.
In many cases where that's absent, and then we're going off and building, you know, great new AI platforms and other technological platforms on top of something that's quite fragile, crumbling.
It is. And so I tend to use something which I call the principles pyramid, as opposed to the pyramid principle by Barbara Minto, brilliant piece of work, where you have your core principles as an organization that connect to the value you provide and who you provide it to, how it's differentiated, what you're all about. And then I think it's important to cascade principles down through the organization so that everybody is adhering to the top level principles, but you have principles that align to that which are germane to the work you do. Because we need to remember that the only thing that produces value is work.
Yeah.
It produces outputs and outcomes, and that produces value. The value is ascribed by the recipients of the output or the outcome. So it's very, very important to make sure that you've got principles that help you make decisions around the work you're doing. And this comes back to how you can then coordinate rather than control, because you've got a controlling mechanism in place in terms of the principles in the organization, and then you coordinate between different groups, different teams, allows you much more flexibilities in your structures in the organization in order to deliver the work that delivers the value into the organization.
Yeah.
You need to build into that work the things that have to sit around it to survive and run a legal organization. So you've got what I call the Magnificent Seven, which is regulation, legislation, risk, safety, sustainability, security, and ethics. And if you make sure that your principles are reflective of those, your work design is reflective of those to deliver value, then you're in a good place.
I guess the risk is, even with a framework, a solid framework like that, we often see people go and document something, but, you know, it's then not cascaded, it's not adopted and filtered into the organisation.
Yeah, very much so. And you see that, again, certainly in controlling organisations where you've got mountains of policies and procedures that they don't survive the battle test. They're not something which is instantly accessible to somebody when they're doing something. Sure, you can make them available in repositories, post them online, put them on the intranet, whatever you want to do with them. But the reality is people make decisions in the heat of the moment. Sometimes there's more time to make those decisions, they're more considered, and you need to take a balance around how you do that. It's always better. I was talking to an organisation who specialise in decisions and fragility recently. It's like, you shouldn't feel the rush to make a decision. It's better to actually consider those decisions because you've got a lot more factors coming into it. People feel pressured to make decisions. But saying that, they still need some guide rails in order to make their decisions.
Yeah.
Because that also connects to culture, because your culture is going to show up where policy and procedure doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And what decisions are people going to make when either policy or procedure doesn't exist, or they haven't checked policy or procedure? Well, the answer is, if you've got some principles which are endemic to the culture, then people are going to make decisions most of the time in line with the principles that they bought into.
Yeah. The
key to making them use those principles all the time is get them to write the principles.
Get them involved. Absolutely. Absolutely. Then they're bought into it.
Absolutely.
They understand it. Yeah, absolutely. It is interesting when you talk about this, you know, even the pressure to make decisions quickly. There is this culture, isn't there, of everything needs to be fast, you know, and they value speed, but actually if you're running at speed in the wrong direction, that's, you know, not delivering any desired outcome whatsoever.
No, it's not. And they call it the decisiveness crisis. So people want to be decisive, and to be seen as a strong leader, you need to be decisive. But to be an effective leader, you need to be right.
And consistent.
So you're absolutely right, is that running fast in the wrong direction is actually just burning assets.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. So making a decision quickly, but it's in the wrong direction, it doesn't align to the customers you serve, the value you provide, how it's differentiated, again, will scupper an otherwise great organisation.
Yeah.
So it's really, really important to have mechanisms in place. And again, that's why we go back to principles, as you and I have always talked about, is if you stick to your principles, you generally can't go wrong. If you need to adjust your principles, you adjust your principles. Things change.
Exactly.
But stick to the ones you've got until you need to change them. Then change them and stick to those.
Exactly. Now we're in a, you know, we hear the terminology AI bubble all the time. So we're in an AI bubble. There was the Dotcom bubble. That popped at some point. What did the pop feel like? What was it?
I think the pop was a little bit overhyped because people, again, got obsessed with company valuations. What's the share price? What is the value of that company? I think NVIDIA has just become a $4 billion organization, the first one in the S&P 500 to do so. So what? It's my response to it is, so what? I mean, the thing that matters is how that hits the ground in the organizations. So everybody said the dot-com era burst, but everybody's still using internet technologies.
Yeah.
So when it burst, it only burst for companies that were overvalued. That the frenzy of excitement about the dot-com era had caused some massive valuations of companies that didn't have solid business models. Those companies that did have solid business models are still around today. Amazon being a great example, right?
Yeah.
Of doing virtually everything right, making mistakes along the way, and learning from those mistakes, which is one of their great strengths. So, yes, the bubble burst, but it only burst in in terms of weeding out the overinflated valuation of companies that should never have been valued that highly. So people made a lot of money, people lost a lot of money, but those were investors, those were maybe pension funds, institutional investors, etc. But for the rest of us, for the rest of the world, the people who are working in their organizations, living their lives, of no importance in reality.
No. Comes back to what you said at the start. So is that what we think will happen again?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I think there's the parallel universes of AI. One is the frenzy of excitement. I mean, let's face it. People who make money from investments make money from the investments moving. They make money from markets moving.
Yeah.
They bet on them going up, they bet on them going down. It's a casino. So to not be talking up the storm is not moving the market, and therefore it prevents them from making money from the market. For the rest of us, it doesn't matter.
No, we've got to make it work day to day.
Day to day, what we need to do in our organizations to continue to deliver value, hopefully grow our value, and grow value to all of our customers, our consumers, our collaborators, and our communities, including our employees.
Exactly. So looking at where we are today, what lessons do you think we haven't yet learned?
There are so many. We've talked about a number of them. We can talk about the data lesson, if you like. The data lesson is an important lesson. In the 90s, I was working in data warehousing, and the big conversations of the day were around data quality, data management, single version of the truth, golden customer records, all of those sorts of things. And I was doing that from 96 to 2000. Here we are, 2026, having the same conversation.
Yeah.
And there will be many, many reasons for that. People have largely invested in the wrong things from a technology basis. There are certain foundations that organizations haven't put in place. They haven't got things right in terms of their data. They've done a little bit of a better job in terms of their compute and their platforms. There's still work to do on their cybersecurity. And there's a lot of work that's going to go on over the next few years in terms of ubiquitous connectivity. So there's kind of those big 5 platforms that need to be in play. And of course, there's a platform tax of any time you want to do a project or a program using technology, you're going to be calling on one, if not all of those 5 platforms in order to drive what you need to do. So we didn't learn the data one, and we still haven't learned the data one.
No.
Is that many of the 3 big reports coming out recently from large organizations talking about the reasons AI projects, pilots, programs are failing, and data looms large in all of those reasons. The reality is that all of the work that was necessary during the data warehousing era, then into the Dotcom era, then into the digital transformation era, wasn't done. It was nickel and dimed.
Yeah.
It was, we'll just do enough. Unfortunately, the flip side of that is we're now in a situation where the only route forward is to do just enough data. AI gives you a bit of an advantage in this era. First of all, technology has moved on. The technologies available to do data in its broadest possible terms are much better than they were when I was doing data warehousing, when the internet was still in black and white. What's happening now is there's a load more technologies, but my question is, are people making the right decisions about data?
Yeah.
I was talking to an organization a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about the potential to use AI in a critical part of their organization. In parallel, there's a data program going on, probably data program number 19 within the organization. And the work they need to do using AI, the position at the moment is it has to wait until the data program has cleaned up all of the data. And I said, well, can the organization afford to wait until that's done? Well, not really, but that's the decision that's been made. So, okay. When it comes to the piece of work we are talking about, answer me this: does the data program focus on your databases, your data platforms, your structured data, and all those sorts of things? I said, yeah, absolutely. Okay. 90%, if not more, of the information you need in order for this AI program to work exists in unstructured data repositories. Mm-hmm. Why are you waiting for a structured data program to work when the data you need is held in unstructured data, which the data program isn't going to touch. So we haven't learnt the data lesson generically.
No.
People don't have a single version of the truth, a single customer record. Some do. I'm sure there's lots of people who will listen to this and say, well, we did that. Fantastic. That's brilliant.
But many don't.
There's still a data trust issue in most organizations as well, is that, well, you've got your single version of the truth within the company, but we keep our own version over here because, that one's ours and we trust it a little bit more. So data provenance transparency is a huge issue in organizations still to this day.
Yeah, and some of that reliability is an output of poor processes that then, don't give the right output or consistent output, or, there's a lot of variation in the output because the inputs are variable, because they're not standardized.
Very much so.
So that there is still absolutely a question around data reliability. And the other thing for me is actually, we talked about how AI is improving even in situations where there is, unstructured data in some cases. But what is the data not telling me? What data isn't there? And AI doesn't necessarily fix that. You kind of have to have the decision making, the logical, critical thinking to understand, okay, this is what the data's telling me, but what is the data not telling me? What don't I know? And that's the question. Those are the questions we need to ask.
We do. The discernment question is, what should I be asking? There's a number of questions. What am I seeing? What am I not seeing? What am I hearing? What am I not hearing?
Exactly.
What should I be hearing? What should I be seeing? That's where the real intelligence comes in. And so data itself isn't always the answer, but in many things, particularly around the automation side of things, is data is a critical issue. So I think organizations are going to have to take a new mindset around data. And I say organizations as a whole. This is not pointed at the IT organization by any stretch of the imagination.
No, far from.
It's because the users of the data, the creators of the data, the producers of the data, if you like, you've got producers, consumers, aggregators, disaggregators, disseminators, all of those different roles to play in a data ecosystem. They don't really sit within the IT function. All of those are sitting across the organization. So the organization as a whole needs to take responsibility and accountability for data and make sure that it understands that data, like AI, which we can talk about more, is a capability that they need to have. And it's not the responsibility of the IT function, data as a capability. It's an organizational capability. And particularly any large organization is going to have to up its game when it comes to its data capability. Again, the production, the consumption, the dissemination, the aggregation, the management, the quality, all of those things around data. It needs it to be something that the organization has at its very core. Something which is so fundamental to the way you compete and win in private sector or deliver service excellence within the financial frameworks and constraints that you're given as a public sector organization. You have to have data change, strategy and culture as a capability within your organization.
100%.
And that means AI as well.
And, it's why I guess even with my company, we're all about the true convergence. It's about convergence, integration. We've got to stop seeing everything in separate silos. I think it's one of the critical lessons that seems to not have yet been learned. I think we do a lot of that sort of separating. And as you say, the reason you've sort of mentioned a few times it's not IT is because how often do we hear, oh, that's IT?
Yeah.
And it's not IT.
No, it's not IT.
And it's not another one function. It's trying to see things a bit more holistically. It's understanding the entire value stream. And I talk about value and your customer. And
it's all about value.
It's all about that. And that is integrated and it runs through everything, every vein in your business.
Yeah. And I think IT is going to be the scapegoat yet again.
It will.
For years, everybody talks about a number of things organizations will say, right? Our people are our greatest asset. And then they'll say about technology is absolutely critical to our success. And they underfund both.
Yeah.
So if the IT organization for years has been underfunded, 70% or more of its budget going on keeping the lights on, business as usual, and then you're asking them for innovation, then you're criticizing them for lack of innovation, where they've asked for more money and you're not giving them more money because you consider it to be the IT thing. Stop the separation.
Oh, it is funny. I mean, I laugh at it now because it's always IT's fault. Always.
Yes. Yeah. It's thrown across the wall to IT and it doesn't come back perfectly, and therefore, oh, it's IT again. Why don't we just go and talk to somebody ourselves and get it done ourselves? And
I hear that so often. I cannot tell you. I must hear that on a daily basis.
Yeah, we see it so often when we talk to organizations, that the shadow IT, the grey IT, the business systems IT, system development, all of those things are done because IT is not delivering. But you didn't fund it and staff it to the level necessary for it to deliver that. Now, I believe in working with an ecosystem of technology partners and vendors. I think it's absolutely essential to be able to deliver the systems that technology systems capabilities that an organization needs. But you still need to make sure that somewhere within the organization, there is somebody who's controlling the risk and the costs of doing so, because they tend to be hidden line items somewhere else in the organization. And then, at the moment, recently you've had system development going on, which I think people building their own applications, got nothing wrong with that in principle, as long as they're secure, as long as they're covered for business continuity and disaster recovery. They're not increasing the risk in the organization. All of those things need to be in place. So I think providing the tools to enable people to do that is a good thing to do. We're going to see that now coming into bear in AI, because all of the technology vendors, they're going to hate me for this again, like they did last year, are encouraging people to go mad building agents. You should be building a clone of yourself. A good ratio is 3 agents to 1 employee. You need to become an agent manager. And that means people who have no experience of doing development, no experience of building applications, are going to be building applications, AI agents, numerous AI agents, in order to help them do their work. In principle, there's nothing wrong with that. But one of the challenges they're going to face, apart from the data, is they're going to try and connect to other systems. And the AI tools are fantastic in putting connectors in place. You can go and get data from other systems. The connectors they use are fundamentally via APIs. And as my friend Stuart Phillips says all the time, is you're asking people to connect probabilistic models to APIs that were designed for deterministic models. APIs that were designed for well-managed, well-designed, well-built, well-tested code to call and do a discrete range of things. Now you're saying, throw a whole load of things at an API and allow people to do a whole lot of things with it. There was an example, I think it was a couple of weeks now, where a company in the travel space had their customer database deleted. And the headline was, an AI technology, I won't mention it because I think it's unfair, deleted our customer database. No, it didn't.
It's not the technology.
It was the person who made the decision to do something using AI, using an API that was designed for programmatic use rather than AI use.
Yeah.
And what they asked it to do was, in their context, reasonable, but the interpretation of that by AI was, well, we need to delete that then, and they lost their customer database. It goes back to the decision making, as it always does.
It's so easy to blame the technology, but you cannot. You just simply cannot.
No, the technology will do what you tell it to do.
Yeah.
And you might say, well, no, AI is a bit different because it thinks for itself. It is still responding to instructions. Again, referring to my friend Stuart Phillips, skills, knowledge, and instructions are the 3 key things that AI has. You're giving it the instructions, or somebody is.
It's a tool, though. It's a tool. It's not a human. It's a tool.
Yeah. And it is going to respond to what it's given to respond to. Now, if you don't have the experience in doing development, and I'm not a developer by background, you don't have the discipline to break things down in the right way in order to make sure that you're asking the right questions. So you might just throw something generic at it, and the AI is going to have to determine the intent of what you are asking. If it gets that intent wrong, you've just given a 6-year-old child a box of explosives.
Yeah.
What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to start to see next.
Yeah. Scary, really.
It is quite scary. Then, of course, the other side of it is AI systems. If you send a request to it, it's invariably not one request. It's a back and forth where you get agentic systems, agent to agent talking. You start to get more and more requests where they check. And again, my colleagues recently was designing a system, and he was watching 2 agents basically arguing with each other. Every time was a token, then 2 tokens, then 4 tokens, then 8 tokens, then 16 tokens, then 32 tokens, and 64 tokens. So this issue of token maxing, again, is going to become an even bigger problem. It's already become a huge problem.
It's been in the news quite a bit, hasn't it? Where people haven't been putting limits or controls, and, the spend has just gone skyrocket high.
Yeah. And that's largely initially from the technology teams doing it.
Of course.
Now you throw the tools over to employees within the organization without the right frameworks and controls in place. It's a question of maturity. We had the same thing in cloud.
Yeah.
When cloud started to explode, the playbooks didn't exist. People weren't sure about how to deploy cloud technologies. Then things started to land. They had landing zones, et cetera, so people could start to use cloud in a more managed, controlled way. It didn't lock them down. It wasn't about locking them down. It's about just helping them make sensible decisions when it came to the deployment of cloud technology. The next generation around AI technologies is going to need to be the same.
Yeah.
You're going to need to have the same mechanisms in place. That means intent can be translated correctly so that the systems will do what you want them to do, and more importantly, won't do what you don't want them to do.
The guardrails.
Yeah.
The guardrails. Now, you've worked with some huge tech giants, Capgemini, Fujitsu, Microsoft.
Yeah.
What are you working on now?
What am I working on now is trying to answer many of these questions for organizations. We've reached a point in AI where people aren't getting the value from it. So the big question I'm trying to help organizations answer is, how do I get value from AI? So we talk about the AI value balance, and the AI value balance is how you get maximum value from AI while you're minimizing the cost and risk of AI. And it means you have to address both sides specifically, but you also have to make sure they're joined up as well. And it's trying to find what that balance is. So we've seen many AI initiatives being cancelled. We've seen organizations abandoning their AI efforts. We've seen AI pilots getting stuck, pilot purgatory, as they say, not getting out of pilot. All of these things are very, very fixable. But because people generally are not balancing the technology and the business conversation, they don't have the experience of seeing these things before, of seeing the patterns that emerged in Dotcom, in mobile, in cloud, in digital transformation, that they're then almost starting from rather than applying the lessons not yet learned.
I agree, and they're also caught up in the hustle culture, needing to get things done quickly, remain competitive. It's a combination of all of those external factors that are compounding the issue.
It is. I was reading something online just yesterday, the day before, where they were talking about a chief HR officer who was fired from a large organization. And the reason being is that somebody senior in the organization has seen the light in terms of an HR application that they could use. And the chief HR officer actually took a very system view to it and said, it's great, but we are not in a place yet that we can benefit from it, because there are things that we need to put in place first in order for that to do. Eventually, the chief HR officer was fired.
This isn't going to end well, is it?
It isn't going to end well, because they went ahead and implemented technology. Employees within the organization cited it as the last day that the organization was actually listening to them, and ended up in some class action suits against the organization.
Ouch.
So it's a huge issue. I heard another similar story the other day and on the face of it, it was a story saying that this is a better practice for AI, where they were saying that an organization had implemented a CV screening technology. Almost everybody out there is starting to do this at the moment.
Seeing lots of this, and the impacts.
And the impacts of it, right. So what they were saying is that the CV screening system they had put in place didn't have the experience and the knowledge necessary to look at the connections between different skills and experiences on a CV and actually build up a picture that says, whilst if I did a tick list, it would fail. If I look at the big picture, this is actually a standing candidate I'd like inside my organisation.
Exactly.
So it was failing.
For me, I want to read between the lines, and that's the sort of thing that just a tick box CV screening cannot achieve.
Yeah.
But so I love what you're now focusing on. It's very mission driven. You're clearly really passionate about it and got a huge amount of experience to bring, as you say, to many organisations that haven't had the opportunity to learn some of those lessons, maybe weren't part of some of the experiences that you've had. So I think that's amazing. So wrapping up then, what's the one key takeaway lesson that you think organisations haven't yet learned that you want people to take away from today's episode? If you had to nail it on one thing.
What's important? I think it's always going to come back to what's important. And what's important connects to the only thing, an organisation exists to deliver value, create and deliver value, whether it's private or public sector. And it's only work that delivers that value. As you advance into the intelligence era, you need to think about work and value. If those are your pivots for your decision making, you're going to be in a much better place and consider it as part of an entire system. If you get that right, you'll be in good shape.
Love that. It sounds simple, difficult to really do well, but it's so critical. Thank you so much, Marcus. It's been great to have you today.
Lovely to see you again.
You too.
Thank you.
So the lessons not yet learnt from today's episode are all about value. Making sure that we really understand what value is, why the company exists, what are those core underlying principles that drive the business forward, that actually guide our decision making. And once you've got that clear, you can build the infrastructure on top of some really strong foundations. The other thing that came out of today's episode was just how important it is to actually see the entire value stream. Make sure that you don't see technology as a separate entity. It absolutely needs to be integrated into the business and everything surrounding it. Thank you so much for joining today's episode, and I look forward to seeing you next time.